Hey everyone, welcome back. Tonight we're building in Minecraft while I tell you about someone who caught their manager in the worst possible position and then watched that same manager try to fire them first. You'd think people in positions of power would be smarter about their secrets, but arrogance has a funny way of making people reckless. Before we dive in, I just want to say thank you. Your support, every like, every comment, truly means a lot to me. I read every message and it honestly makes a huge difference. Thanks for being here. Now, let's be honest. When you're sleeping with interns and then weaponizing HR to cover your tracks, you're not just crossing lines. You're basically handing someone a loaded weapon and daring them to use it. So grab something warm to drink, get comfortable, and let's dive in. I was working late when I stumbled upon my manager, Derek, with a 22-year-old intern in the conference room. They didn't see me, but I saw everything. The lights were dim, the door was cracked open just enough, and there they were, tangled up on the conference table like they owned the place. I froze for a second, my brain trying to process what I was looking at, and then I just backed away slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't make a sound. I didn't confront them. I just left and went back to my desk, staring at my computer screen like it would somehow erase what I just witnessed. I didn't sleep that night. I kept replaying it in my head, wondering what I was supposed to do with this information. Derek was my direct manager. He controlled my performance reviews, my projects, my entire career trajectory at this company, and now I knew something that could destroy him. Part of me thought maybe I should just keep my head down and pretend I never saw anything. But another part of me, the part that had always hated how Derek operated, knew that staying quiet wasn't an option. The next morning, Derek called me into his office. HR was already sitting there, hands folded, looking at me like I'd committed some kind of crime. My stomach dropped. Derek didn't waste any time. He told me I'd been underperforming, that my work quality had declined significantly over the past few months, and that I was being placed on a performance improvement plan. 30 days to turn things around or I'd be terminated. I sat there, stunned, while HR slid a document across the table for me to sign. I barely heard what they were saying. All I could think was, this is retaliation. He knows I saw something, or he's worried I might have, and now he's covering his tracks by building a case against me. I signed the document because I didn't know what else to do, but as soon as I left that office, I knew exactly what was happening. Derek wasn't just trying to fire me, he was trying to discredit me before I could say anything about what I'd seen, and if I went to HR now after being put on a performance plan, who would believe me? It would look like I was making things up to save my job. You almost have to admire the audacity. Over the next 2 weeks, Derek watched me like a hawk. Every email I sent, every meeting I attended, every minor decision I made was suddenly under a microscope. He'd show up at my desk unannounced, asking for updates on projects that weren't even due yet. He'd CC HR on emails pointing out tiny mistakes, things that would normally get a quick correction and nothing more. He was building a paper trail, documenting every single thing he could twist into evidence of poor performance. And honestly, it was working. I started second-guessing everything I did, triple-checking every email, staying late every night just to make sure there was nothing he could use against me. But here's the thing. While Derek was busy trying to bury me, I was busy gathering receipts. I started going through old emails, Slack messages, anything I could find that might show a pattern of inappropriate behavior. And once I knew what I was looking for, it didn't take long to find it. There were emails from Derek to interns, vague but suggestive, talking about one-on-one mentorship opportunities and after-hours strategy sessions. There were Slack messages where he'd joke about taking certain interns out for drinks to discuss their future with the company. And then there was the security footage. Our office building had cameras everywhere, hallways, lobby, even the floors near the conference rooms. I didn't have access to the footage myself, but I knew someone in facilities who owed me a favor. I asked him casually if he could pull timestamps from the night I'd worked late. He didn't ask why. He just sent me a spreadsheet with badge swipes and camera logs. Derek and that intern had both entered the conference room within 2 minutes of each other. They didn't leave for over an hour, and this wasn't the first time. The logs showed a pattern going back months. Different interns, same late-night conference room visits, same suspicious timing. That's when everything unraveled. I didn't go to HR, not yet. I kept working, kept playing along with Derek's performance plan, kept letting him think he was winning, and he was so confident, so sure that he had me cornered, that he didn't even try to hide his smugness. He'd smirk at me in meetings, make little comments about how I should start updating my resume, how the job market was tough right now. It was almost funny how perfectly it backfired. 2 weeks into the performance plan, Derek called me into his office again. This time, HR wasn't there. It was just him. He closed the door, sat down, and told me that despite the performance plan, things weren't improving. He said he was going to recommend my termination to HR, effective immediately, and that I should consider this a courtesy heads up. He even offered to write me a neutral reference letter if I agreed to leave quietly. No fuss, no formal termination on my record, just a clean resignation. I looked at him, this man who thought he was so clever, and I said, okay. I told him I'd think about it and get back to him by the end of the day. He seemed pleased with himself, like he'd just solved a problem. I walked out of his office, went back to my desk and opened my email. I forwarded everything to the CEO. Every email, every Slack message, every security log, every piece of evidence I'd collected over the past 2 weeks. I CC'd the entire executive team, the head of HR, and our legal department. I wrote a short, professional message explaining what I'd witnessed, what had happened since, and why I believed Derek's performance plan was retaliation. And then I hit send. Within 20 minutes, Derek was called into an emergency meeting. Within an hour, he was escorted out of the building by security. I watched from my desk as he walked past, his face red, his jaw clenched, carrying a box of his personal items, like some kind of cliché corporate firing scene. He didn't look at me. He didn't look at anyone. He just left. And suddenly the whole plan fell apart. The next day, HR called me in for a meeting. They apologized. They suspended the performance improvement plan, removed all documentation from my file, and told me there would be a full investigation into Derek's conduct. Over the next week, 3 interns came forward. They corroborated everything I'd found, adding details I didn't even know about. Pressure for promotions, promises of extended internships in exchange for private meetings, inappropriate comments that had made them uncomfortable but too afraid to report. Derek had been doing this for years, and nobody had said anything because he was good at his job, well liked by executives, and very, very careful about who he targeted. 2 months later, I got promoted. They offered me Derek's position. Same office, same responsibilities, better pay. I accepted. If you've made it this far into the chaos, you're as addicted to Reddit drama as I am. Make sure to subscribe and tell me where you're watching from in the comments below. Seriously, I need to know I'm not the only one losing sleep over these stories. But Derek's downfall wasn't even the messiest firing I've witnessed. Because the real devastation? That came when I had to sit across from HR and explain why my former best friend deserved to be terminated. My friend Jenna deleted an entire client database by accident. Not just a folder, not just a few records. The entire thing. Years of client information, contact details, project histories, billing records, all of it just gone in one catastrophic click. I found her in the bathroom, mascara running down her face, hyperventilating into her hands. She could barely get the words out. She kept saying she was going to get fired, that her career was over, that she didn't know what she'd done wrong, but everything was just gone. I didn't even hesitate. Jenna and I had been friends since college. We'd gotten hired at the same company within months of each other, celebrated promotions together, vented about terrible managers over drinks. She was one of my best friends, so when she begged me to help her, I said yes immediately. I told her to go home, to take a sick day, and that I'd figure it out. She hugged me so hard I thought my ribs would crack, thanking me over and over, promising she owed me everything. I stayed at the office until 3 in the morning. I'm not even in IT, but I know enough about systems to navigate backups and recovery protocols. I spent hours combing through server logs, restoring files piece by piece, cross-referencing timestamps to make sure nothing was corrupted. By the time the sun came up, the database was back. Not perfect, but functional. Good enough that nobody would notice anything had been wrong unless they looked really closely. When my boss asked what happened, I told him it was a server glitch. A weird bug in the system that I'd managed to catch and fix before it caused any real damage. He seemed annoyed but not suspicious. He thanked me for staying late and told me to submit my overtime hours. Jenna sent me a dozen texts that morning, crying emojis and heart emojis, and promises that she'd make it up to me someday. I told her not to worry about it. That's what friends do, right? 2 months later, the company announced downsizing, budget cuts, restructuring, the usual corporate nonsense that means people are about to lose their jobs. Everyone was on edge, walking around like we were waiting for an axe to fall. I wasn't too worried. My performance reviews were solid. I'd been with the company for 4 years, and I'd just pulled off a miracle fix on that database situation. I figured I was safe, and here's where it gets absurd. I got called into a meeting with my manager and someone from HR I'd never seen before. They didn't waste time with pleasantries. My manager slid a folder across the table and told me I was being let go, effective immediately. I stared at him, confused, waiting for the punchline. He said they'd identified multiple technical errors and poor judgment on my part, specifically citing the database incident from 2 months ago. He said I'd made a critical mistake that could have cost the company millions, and that while they appreciated my effort to fix it, the initial error demonstrated a lack of competence they couldn't overlook during restructuring. I couldn't breathe. I tried to explain that I didn't delete the database, that I'd fixed it, that there must be some kind of misunderstanding, but he cut me off. He said they'd spoken to other team members who corroborated the story, that someone had come forward out of loyalty and honesty, admitting they'd covered for me because we were friends, but that they couldn't stay silent anymore given the layoffs. They didn't say Jenna's name, but they didn't have to. She'd told them I was the one who deleted the database, that she'd stayed late to help me fix my mistake, that she'd lied to management to protect me because she felt sorry for me. And now, with her job on the line, she'd decided honesty was more important than friendship. I sat there in complete shock while HR walked me through severance paperwork. I was escorted out of the building within the hour, my desk already cleared into a cardboard box like I was some kind of security risk. Jenna wasn't at her desk when I walked past. I didn't see her. I didn't get to confront her. I just left, numb and humiliated, carrying my box to my car while former co-workers watched through the windows. The unfairness of it made my chest hurt. I'd saved her job, her reputation, her entire career, and she'd thrown me under the bus the second it benefited her. She kept her position. I lost mine, and I had no proof, no evidence, nothing to fight back with. She'd been smart about it. She'd waited long enough that the incident felt distant, and she'd framed herself as the reluctant whistleblower who'd finally done the right thing. But that wasn't even the worst part. I spent 3 days in a fog, barely eating, replaying every moment of our friendship and wondering how I'd missed the signs that she was capable of something like this. And then, on the 4th day, I remembered something. The server room required badge access. Every entry was logged, time-stamped, recorded in a security database that IT kept for compliance reasons. I didn't work there anymore, so I couldn't access the logs myself, but I knew someone in facilities management who'd helped me with building access issues before. I reached out, casual and friendly, and asked if he could pull the access logs from the night of the database incident. I didn't tell him why. He sent them over without asking questions. There it was. Jenna's badge swiping into the server room at 8:47 p.m. My badge was nowhere on the log. I hadn't even been in that part of the building. I'd fixed everything remotely from my desk using admin credentials. The timestamps proved she was lying. She was the only person who'd accessed that room during the window when the database was deleted. I didn't hesitate. I sent the logs directly to the CEO, CCing HR and my former manager. I wrote a short email explaining exactly what had happened, attaching the security records, and pointing out that Jenna had not only caused the original problem, but had lied about it to save herself during layoffs. I kept it professional, factual, and absolutely damning. The response came faster than I expected. The CEO called me personally. He apologized, said there had been a serious misunderstanding, and that they were conducting an immediate investigation. He asked if I'd be willing to come back, that they'd reinstate me with back pay, and a raise as an apology for the mistake. Jenna was fired within the week. I heard through mutual friends that she'd tried to deny everything at first, then claimed it was a misunderstanding, then finally admitted she'd panicked during the downsizing and made a bad decision. None of it mattered. She was gone. Her reputation in the industry was destroyed. People talk and word spreads fast about someone who will betray their friends to save themselves. The CEO called again, sweetening the offer. More money, better title, a formal apology in writing, and I thought about it. I really did. But every time I pictured walking back into that office, sitting at my old desk pretending everything was fine, I felt sick. So I declined. I told them I appreciated the offer, but I'd already started looking at other opportunities and didn't think it was the right fit anymore. The truth was, I didn't want to work somewhere that had taken Jenna's word over mine without even checking the facts. I didn't want to sit in meetings with the manager who'd escorted me out like a criminal. And I definitely didn't want to spend my energy rebuilding trust with people who'd thrown me away the second it was convenient. I found a new job 3 weeks later. Better pay, better culture, better everything. And I never spoke to Jenna again. Workplace betrayals cut deep, but at least you see them coming eventually. What you don't see coming, when the person you're planning to marry has been living an entire second existence. I found a second phone in my fiancé Marcus's gym bag. I wasn't snooping, not intentionally anyway. I was just grabbing his water bottle to wash it because he'd left it in there for 3 days and it was starting to smell. And there it was, tucked into the side pocket, a phone I'd never seen before, not his work phone, not his regular phone. A completely different device, cheap looking, like a burner you'd see in a spy movie. My stomach dropped before I even turned it on. The screen lit up with notifications, texts from someone saved as babe with heart emojis, dinner reservations at restaurants I'd never been to, photos of weekend trips I definitely wasn't on, beach sunsets, candlelit tables, selfies of Marcus grinning in places I didn't recognize. I scrolled through the messages, my hands shaking, reading conversations that sounded exactly like the ones we had. Good morning texts, inside jokes, plans for the future. It was like reading a script of my own relationship, except I wasn't in it. I confronted him the second he got home. I held up the phone and asked him what it was. He froze in the doorway, his face going pale, and then he tried to laugh it off. He said it was a work thing, a phone for clients, nothing to worry about. I asked him why clients were texting him, "Can't wait to see you tonight, baby," and he stopped laughing. He started stammering, saying it was a misunderstanding, that I was taking things out of context, that he could explain. And then, before I could say anything else, he locked himself in the bathroom. I stood there staring at the closed door, listening to him breathe heavily on the other side, and I made a decision. I called the number, the one saved as babe in his phone. It rang 3 times before a woman answered, her voice bright and friendly, like she was expecting someone else. She said hello, and I asked who she was. There was a long pause, then she asked who I was. I told her I was Marcus's fiancé. Another pause, longer this time, and then she said, "What?" Imagine being this confidently wrong. We compared notes right there on the phone, while Marcus stayed locked in the bathroom. Her name was Jessica. She'd been dating Marcus for 8 months. He told her he worked in consulting and traveled a lot for his job, which explained why he was only available on certain weekends. He'd taken her to his apartment, which I now realized was an Airbnb he must have been renting just to keep up the lie. She had photos of them together, dates and timestamps that matched weekends he'd told me he was visiting his sick uncle in another state. Same man, same promises, overlapping timelines. She had no idea I existed. I had no idea she existed. And Marcus, apparently, thought he could just keep both of us in separate little boxes forever. Jessica was in shock. I was in shock. But weirdly, we weren't angry at each other. We were both just trying to process the fact that we'd been dating the same person, that he'd built 2 entirely separate lives and managed to maintain them both without either of us catching on until now. She asked me what I was going to do. I told her I was calling off the wedding. She said she was breaking up with him too. We agreed to stay in touch, and then I hung up and stared at the bathroom door. Marcus finally came out an hour later. His eyes were red, his face blotchy, and he tried to hug me. I stepped back and told him we were done. He started crying, begging me to listen, saying it was a mistake, that he loved me, that Jessica didn't mean anything. I asked him if he'd told her the same thing about me. He didn't answer. I told him to pack his stuff and get out. He left that night. But that wasn't even the worst part. I didn't just break up with him quietly. I wasn't going to let him spin this into some story where I was the crazy, jealous fiancé who overreacted. So I posted everything on social media. I wrote a detailed explanation of what happened, included screenshots of the text messages, photos from his secret phone, even a side-by-side comparison of the trips he took with me versus the trips he took with Jessica. I tagged him. I tagged his family. I made it public, and within an hour it had been shared hundreds of times. Friends, co-workers, distant relatives, everyone saw it. There was no way he could deny it. There was no way he could control the narrative. The comments were a mix of shock, support, and schadenfreude. People I hadn't talked to in years were messaging me, telling me they'd always thought something was off about Marcus, that I deserved better, that they were glad I found out before the wedding. Jessica commented too, confirming everything I'd written and adding her own details. It was brutal, it was public, and it was exactly what he deserved. Then came the breaking point. 2 days later, Marcus's mother showed up at my apartment. I opened the door and she was standing there sobbing, mascara running down her face, looking like someone had died. She pushed past me into my living room and started begging me to delete the posts. She said I was ruining the family reputation, that Marcus's father was humiliated, that their friends and business associates had seen everything, and it was destroying their social standing. She kept saying, please, please, just take it down, like I owed her something. I told her no. I told her that her son had lied to me for months, that he'd built an entire double life, and that if his reputation was ruined, it was because of his own actions, not mine. She didn't want to hear it. She pulled out her checkbook right there in my living room and offered me $15,000 to delete everything and say it was all a misunderstanding. She said she'd tell people we'd had a fight, that I'd overreacted, that Marcus and I had worked things out privately and decided to go our separate ways amicably. I stared at her, this woman who I'd thought would be my mother-in-law, who I'd had dinners with and holiday celebrations with, and I realized she didn't care that her son had hurt me. She didn't care that he'd hurt Jessica. She just cared about appearances, about what people would think, about protecting the family name. This feels like a deleted scene from a sitcom. I told her to leave. She refused. She kept insisting, raising the offer to 20,000, then 25, getting more desperate with every refusal. I took out my phone and started recording. I recorded her offering me money, recorded her begging me to lie, recorded every word of her trying to bribe me into silence. And when she finally left, furious and empty-handed, I posted that too. The reaction was immediate. People were outraged, not at me, at her, at the audacity of trying to pay someone to cover up her son's betrayal, at the entitlement, at the complete lack of accountability. The post went viral in our local community. Marcus's family became a punchline. Their friends distanced themselves, and Marcus, who'd been trying to lay low and wait for the scandal to blow over, finally cracked under the pressure and moved to another state. Jessica and I got coffee last month. We laughed about how absurd the whole thing was, how we'd both dodged the same bullet, how grateful we were that his stupidity had brought us together instead of tearing us apart. She's doing great. I'm doing great. And Marcus? Last I heard, he's still single. Family reputations are fragile things, aren't they? But sometimes the people who should protect you are the ones rewriting your entire history. I'd always been told my biological mother died in childbirth. That was the story. Clean, tragic, final. My dad would get this faraway look in his eyes whenever I asked about her, and my mum, the woman who raised me, would gently redirect the conversation to something else. I grew up believing I was the reason my birth mother wasn't here, that my existence had cost her hers. It's a heavy thing to carry as a kid, but eventually you just accept it as part of your origin story and move on. At 28, I took one of those DNA tests. You know the kind, the ones everyone does for fun at Christmas because they want to find out if they're 3% Scandinavian or whatever. I wasn't looking for anything in particular. I just thought it would be interesting. Maybe I'd find some distant cousins. Maybe I'd learn something cool about my ancestry. What I found instead was a half-sister. Her name was Claire. She reached out to me through the DNA site's messaging system, hesitant but curious. She said she'd been looking for biological relatives, and my profile had popped up as a close match. We exchanged a few messages, cautious at first, and then decided to meet for coffee. I didn't tell my parents. I don't know why. Maybe part of me already sensed that something was off. When Claire and I met, she brought a photo album. Old pictures, family snapshots, the kind of stuff you'd find in any suburban home. And there, smiling in dozens of photos, was a woman Claire called Mom. Our mother, very much alive, remarried, surrounded by 3 other kids, Claire included. I stared at those pictures for what felt like an hour, my brain refusing to process what I was seeing. This woman, who I'd been told died bringing me into the world, was living a completely normal life 2 states over. Claire didn't know about me, not until the DNA test. She'd grown up with our mother, had a childhood full of birthday parties and family vacations, and all the normal things I'd imagined my birth mother had been robbed of. She had no idea I existed, and when I told her what I'd been told, that our mother had died in childbirth, she went pale. She said that didn't make any sense. Our mother had never mentioned another child, never hinted at a secret, never acted like she was carrying some kind of guilt or grief. The pieces started falling into place, and none of them fit the story I'd been told. I went home that night and sat my parents down. I showed them the photos. I told them about Claire. I asked them, point blank, to explain. And here's the thing, they didn't even try to deny it. My dad just sighed, like I'd uncovered some mildly inconvenient secret, and my mum folded her arms and said we needed to talk. Turns out, my biological mother didn't die. She had an affair. My dad, the man I'd called Dad my whole life, wasn't my biological father. His wife, my mum, found out about the affair when my birth mother got pregnant with me. She demanded that all contact be cut, completely. No visits, no calls, no acknowledgement. My birth mother agreed, apparently, and handed me over right after I was born, and then they told everyone, including me, that she died. Because it was easier, because it kept the family intact, because it was, as my mum put it, for my own good. I sat there staring at these two people who'd raised me, and I didn't recognize them. I asked why they didn't just tell me the truth when I got older, when I could handle it. My mum said it would have been too complicated, that it would have hurt me more to know I'd been given away. My dad said they thought it was kinder to let me believe she was gone. They doubled down, insisting they'd made the right choice, that I should be grateful they'd protected me from the messy reality. The arrogance was their downfall all along. I didn't yell, I didn't cry. I just told them I needed time to process and left. But the more I thought about it, the angrier I got. They'd lied to me for almost 3 decades. They'd let me grow up thinking I was responsible for someone's death. They'd stolen my chance to know my biological mother, to have a relationship with her, to even make that choice for myself. And they still thought they were the good guys in this story. Then came the breaking point. Thanksgiving was 3 weeks away. Our family does this big thing every year, 30 plus relatives crammed into my parents' house, the whole production. I knew they were expecting me to show up, play along, pretend everything was fine, and for a minute I considered just skipping it. But then I thought, why should I be the one to disappear? Why should I protect their lie? So I went. I showed up with a smile, helped set the table, made small talk with aunts and uncles who had no idea what was coming. We all sat down for dinner, and my dad started saying grace like he does every year. Everyone bowed their heads. The room got quiet, and when he finished, right before everyone started reaching for the food, I stood up. I said I had something I wanted to share with the family. My mum's face went white. My dad's jaw tightened. But they couldn't stop me, not without making a scene, so they just sat there while I pulled out my phone. I explained calmly and clearly that I'd recently discovered my biological mother was alive. I showed them the DNA results. I showed them photos of Claire, of our mother, of the family I'd never known existed. And then I explained that my parents had lied about her death, that they'd hidden the truth for 28 years, and that I'd only just found out. The table erupted. My grandmother, my dad's mum, actually fainted. Someone rushed to get her water. My mum started yelling at me, saying I was being cruel and selfish, that I was ruining Thanksgiving over something that didn't matter anymore. My dad just sat there, silent, staring at his plate. Cousins were asking questions, aunts were gasping, uncles were demanding explanations. Half the family got up and left within 10 minutes, some siding with my parents, some just wanting to escape the chaos. It was the most dramatic thing I've ever done, and I don't regret it for a second. My parents haven't spoken to me since. My mum sent one text a week later saying I'd embarrassed the family and destroyed their reputation. My dad didn't even bother with that. They've made it clear they consider this a betrayal, that I've chosen my biological mother over them. And maybe I have, because here's the thing, my biological mother didn't know. Claire got in touch with her after our meeting, told her about me, and my birth mother broke down. She thought I'd been told the truth, that I'd chosen not to reach out. She had no idea I'd been lied to. We met a month after Thanksgiving. She apologized for giving me up, explained that she'd been young and scared and pressured into it. She said she thought about me every single day, wondered how I was, hoped I was happy. We've been getting coffee every Sunday since. It's strange building a relationship with someone who's technically your mother, but feels more like a new friend. But it's good. It's honest. And after 28 years of lies, honest feels pretty damn valuable. DNA tests have this funny way of detonating families, don't they? And speaking of genetic bombshells at the worst possible moments, my aunt gave everyone DNA kits for Christmas as a fun family bonding activity. She'd seen some heartwarming story on the news about long-lost relatives reconnecting through ancestry tests and thought it would be a cute thing for our family to do together. She bought kits for everyone, wrapped them up with little bows, and handed them out at Christmas dinner with this huge smile on her face. She was so excited about it, talking about how we'd all discover our heritage percentages and maybe find some distant cousins in Ireland or Italy, or wherever our ancestors came from. It seemed harmless. Honestly, most of us thought it was kind of a fun idea. My grandma was thrilled, my Uncle Tom made some joke about finally proving he was part Viking, and my cousin Jake said he hoped he was secretly royalty. We all swabbed our cheeks right there at the dinner table, sealed up the tubes, and mailed them off the next week. Then we sort of forgot about it. Life went on. Nobody really thought about those little tubes sitting in some lab somewhere, waiting to detonate our entire family structure. 3 months later, the results came back. I got an email notification first, logged into the site, and spent about 20 minutes looking at pie charts, showing I was 40% this and 30% that. It was interesting, but not life-changing. I shared my results in the family group chat, and a few other people started posting theirs too. My mum, my dad, a couple of cousins. Everything seemed normal, and then Jake posted a screenshot with a single question mark. His results showed zero connection to Uncle Tom. Not low, not distant. Zero. The site had even flagged it, suggesting there might have been a sample mix-up, because Jake's DNA didn't match the person listed as his father at all. The group chat went silent for a minute, and then Jake sent another message saying he was calling his parents. That's when I knew this wasn't going to end quietly, but that wasn't even the worst part. Within the hour, my Uncle Tom posted his own results, and right there, in the relatives section, was a 26-year-old woman named Sophia, listed as his daughter. She had her profile public, photos, and everything. None of us had ever heard of her. Uncle Tom's message in the group chat was just 3 words. We need to talk. Turns out Sophia had been reaching out to my uncle for years. She'd found him through a previous DNA test, contacted him privately, and he'd been supporting her financially ever since. Sending her money for college, helping with rent, meeting up with her a few times a year when he traveled for work. He'd kept her a secret from everyone, including his wife, my Aunt Carol, because he didn't know how to explain that he'd had a daughter from a relationship before he got married and had only found out about her existence 5 years ago when she tracked him down. The family group chat exploded. Aunt Carol was devastated, typing in all caps, asking why he'd hidden this from her, why he'd been secretly funneling money to a stranger instead of being honest. My uncle tried to explain, but everything he said just made it worse. Jake wasn't responding to anyone. He'd gone completely silent. And here's where it gets absurd. My grandmother posted her results, and in her relatives section was a whole branch of family we'd never known existed. Names we didn't recognize, people with the same last name as my late grandfather, all living in Mexico. My grandma, confused, started messaging some of them. One of them responded within minutes. Turned out my grandfather had another family during his so-called business trips in the 70s and 80s. A whole second life with a woman in Mexico City, 3 kids, grandkids, an entire parallel existence that he'd maintained for decades until he died. My grandmother, bless her, posted a screenshot of the messages in the group chat without fully understanding what she was sharing. And just like that, the truth was out. My grandfather, the man we'd all admired and mourned, had been living a double life. My mom and her siblings started arguing immediately, some refusing to believe it, others saying they'd always suspected something was off about his long trips. The family group chat devolved into chaos. People were arguing, accusing, defending. Some saying we should reach out to the Mexican relatives, others saying we should pretend we never saw the results. My aunt, the one who'd bought the DNA kits in the first place, sent a message apologizing over and over, saying she just wanted to do something fun and had no idea it would turn into this. We all agreed, or at least the adults agreed, that we needed to talk about this in person. So we planned to address everything at the summer reunion, which was already scheduled for July. Surely, we thought, a few months would be enough time for everyone to cool down and approach this rationally. We were so wrong. The summer reunion was held at my uncle's house, same as always, except this time the tension was suffocating before anyone even arrived. Jake showed up with his mum, and you could tell they'd been crying. Uncle Tom looked like he hadn't slept in weeks. My grandma brought old photo albums like she was trying to prove my grandfather's innocence with pictures of family vacations. And then Sophia showed up, uninvited. She'd apparently been messaging my uncle, asking if she could meet the rest of the family, and he told her it wasn't a good time. She came anyway, just walked up to the front door, introduced herself, and said she wanted to be part of the family. That's when everything unraveled. Aunt Carol lost it, started screaming at Uncle Tom, asking how dare he let this woman show up at their house, how dare he continue lying and sneaking around. Sophia tried to explain that she just wanted to know her father's family, that she didn't mean to cause problems. Jake, who'd been silent up until this point, suddenly stood up and started yelling at his mum, demanding to know who his real father was. His mum broke down, admitted she'd had an affair 28 years ago, a brief thing with someone she worked with, and she'd never told anyone because she wasn't even sure at first. By the time Jake was born, she and Uncle Tom were married, and it was easier to just let him believe Jake was his. She'd convinced herself it didn't matter. DNA didn't make someone a father. Uncle Tom had raised Jake, loved him, and that was what counted. Jake walked out, just left without another word. Meanwhile, my mom and her siblings were in the corner arguing about my grandfather. One of my uncles was insisting we reach out to the Mexican family, that they deserved to know about us too, that it wasn't fair to pretend they didn't exist. My mom was saying absolutely not, that it would be disrespectful to my grandmother. My grandmother was crying, saying she didn't know what to believe anymore, that her entire marriage felt like a lie. Sophia was standing in the middle of the room looking horrified, like she'd just realized what she'd walked into. Uncle Tom was trying to calm everyone down, but nobody was listening to him. Aunt Carol grabbed her purse and left, saying she was filing for divorce and never wanted to see any of us again. The reunion ended with people screaming, crying, and splitting off into separate groups. Some people left with my grandmother to comfort her. Others went after Jake to make sure he was okay. A few people actually stayed and tried to have a normal barbecue, which felt surreal and completely inappropriate given the circumstances. We haven't gathered since. The family group chat got abandoned. A few smaller chats formed, little factions of people who were still speaking to each other. Jake eventually reconciled with Uncle Tom, deciding that biology didn't erase 28 years of being his dad. Aunt Carol did file for divorce. Sophia occasionally comments on my uncle's Facebook posts, and some of the family has accepted her, while others refuse to acknowledge her existence. My grandmother reached out to the Mexican family. Turns out my grandfather's other wife had passed away years ago, but his kids were still alive and curious about us. Some of my cousins have started building relationships with them. Others want nothing to do with it. As for my aunt, the one who bought the DNA kits, she doesn't come to family events anymore, says she feels too guilty. Every time someone mentions the reunion, someone else jokes that we should thank her for the most entertaining Christmas gift in family history. Nobody's laughing. At least that chaos was accidental. But financial betrayal? That's always intentional, especially when it comes from the people who share your blood. I was denied a mortgage for my first home. I'd been saving for years, had a solid job, a decent down payment, everything lined up perfectly. Or so I thought. The loan officer called me in for what I assumed would be a routine final meeting before approval. Instead, she slid a credit report across her desk with this apologetic look on her face and asked if I knew about the outstanding debt. I stared at the numbers, confused. $47,000 in defaulted credit card debt. Collections agencies. Missed payments going back years. None of it made sense because I'd never opened those accounts. I told her there had to be a mistake. She walked me through each account, reading off the details. Applications filed from my childhood address. my social security number, my name spelled correctly with my birth date. Everything matched except for one crucial fact. I didn't do any of it. She suggested identity theft and recommended I file a police report. I left that office in a daze, my dream of owning a home suddenly replaced with the nightmare of figuring out who'd stolen my identity and destroyed my credit. The forensic review took 3 weeks. Financial investigators traced the accounts back to their origins, pulling application records, IP addresses, timestamps. Every single fraudulent account had been opened using information that only someone close to me would have had access to. My social security card had been kept in a family safe at my parents' house. The applications were filed from my childhood address, the one I'd lived at until leaving for college. The pieces pointed to someone in my family, but I didn't want to believe it. And here's where it gets absurd. I started going through the purchase history on those cards. Luxury electronics, designer clothes, weekend trips to Vegas and Miami, expensive dinners at restaurants I'd never heard of. Someone had been living it up on my credit for years, racking up charges like money didn't matter because, to them, it didn't. It wasn't their debt. I cross-referenced the timeline with my own life. The first account was opened 6 years ago, right after I left for college, and that's when I knew. My brother Tyler. He was 19 when I left for school, still living at home, still figuring out his life. He would have had easy access to my social security number, to the family safe, to all the personal information needed to open accounts in my name. And looking at the purchases, the pattern matched his lifestyle perfectly. The gaming equipment, the sneakers, the trips with his friends, it was all him. I felt sick. This wasn't some random criminal who bought my information on the dark web. This was my brother, someone I'd grown up with, someone I'd trusted, systematically destroying my financial future so he could fund his lifestyle, and he'd been doing it for 6 years without a single hint of guilt or hesitation. I confronted him privately first. I called him, told him I knew what he'd done, and gave him a chance to explain. He denied it immediately, said I was crazy, that I had no proof. I told him about the forensic investigation, the application records, the purchase history that matched his exact spending patterns. There was a long silence, and then he laughed. Not a nervous laugh, a genuine, amused laugh. He said everyone makes mistakes, that I was being dramatic, and that I could just fix my credit over time, like it was no big deal, like he hadn't stolen $47,000 from me and obliterated my financial credibility. That's when everything unraveled. Christmas was 2 days away. Our whole family was gathering at my parents' house like we did every year. Tyler assumed I'd keep quiet, that I'd handle it privately to avoid drama. He was wrong. I showed up to Christmas dinner with printed copies of the credit report, the forensic analysis, and every piece of evidence linking him to the fraud. I waited until everyone was seated, until my parents started passing around dishes and making small talk, and then I stood up. I said I needed to tell everyone something important. The table went quiet. I looked at Tyler, who was already shifting uncomfortably in his seat, and I laid it all out. I explained that I'd been denied a mortgage because of massive debt I didn't know existed. I explained that someone had stolen my identity 6 years ago and destroyed my credit. And then I said that forensic investigators had traced everything back to Tyler. My mum gasped. My dad demanded to know if I was sure. Tyler's face went red and he started stammering, trying to deny it. But I just kept pulling out documents, application records with his handwriting on routing information, purchase receipts sent to his email address, GPS data from his phone matching locations where cards were used. It was overwhelming and undeniable. Tyler finally stopped trying to defend himself and went on the offensive instead. He said I was ruining Christmas over money, that family was more important than credit scores, that I was being selfish for making this public. He actually called me selfish. The guy who'd stolen my identity and racked up tens of thousands in debt was calling me selfish for exposing him. Oh, so we're doing that now? My parents tried to mediate, suggesting we talk about it privately after dinner, that we didn't need to deal with this in front of everyone. But I was done protecting Tyler's reputation. I told them I'd already filed a police report, that investigators were building a criminal case, and that Tyler would be facing charges for identity theft and fraud. The room exploded. My aunt started crying. My uncle said this was going too far. Tyler got up and left, slamming the door behind him. Tyler was arrested on New Year's Eve. The police had enough evidence to charge him with multiple counts of identity theft, credit card fraud, and forgery. My parents called me that night sobbing, begging me to drop the charges. They said I was tearing the family apart, that Tyler had made a mistake but didn't deserve to have his life ruined over it. They offered to pay back the debt themselves if I'd just make this go away. They wanted me to sacrifice my future, again, to protect their golden child from the consequences of his actions. I said no. I told them that Tyler had 6 years to come clean, 6 years to stop, 6 years to make this right. He chose to keep going. He chose to laugh when I confronted him. He chose to call me dramatic when I told him he'd destroyed my credit. And now he could choose to face the legal consequences of his choices. My parents haven't forgiven me for that. They think I'm cold, vindictive, cruel. But I'm the one who lost a house because of Tyler's fraud. I'm the one who has to rebuild my financial life from scratch. Tyler pled guilty 4 months later. Part of his plea deal involved restitution, though I'm not holding my breath on actually seeing that money. He got probation, community service, and a felony record. My parents barely speak to me now. Family gatherings are awkward at best, hostile at worst. But my credit score is slowly climbing. The fraudulent accounts are being removed from my report one by one. And last month, after a year of appeals and documentation and patience, my mortgage application was finally approved. I'm closing on my first home next week. Tyler won't be invited to the housewarming party. Credit scores recover eventually, but reputations, those take just one well-timed revelation to destroy completely. My grandfather's funeral was packed. Over 200 people crammed into the funeral home, spilling out into the hallway, filling every available seat, and then some. He'd been a pillar of the community, a businessman everyone respected, a family man everyone admired. When they asked me to give the eulogy, I felt honored, terrified, but honored. I wanted to do him justice, to capture who he really was, to give everyone closure. I started going through his things to find stories, memories, anything that would make the speech more personal. That's when I found the journals in the attic, boxes of them, tucked away behind old Christmas decorations and forgotten furniture. Leather-bound notebooks filled with his handwriting, spanning decades. I thought I'd struck gold, personal anecdotes, family history, the kind of material that makes a eulogy meaningful. What I found instead were letters, confessions, proof that my grandfather had fathered a child with his secretary in 1978 and paid her to disappear. Her name was Linda. The letters were detailed, almost painfully so. He wrote about the affair, about the pregnancy, about the panic when she told him. He wrote about offering her money, a lot of money, to leave town and never contact the family. And she took it. She left. And the child, a boy named Michael, grew up never knowing his father. But that wasn't even the worst part. There were more recent letters too, from Michael himself. He'd been trying to contact our family for years. Letters addressed to my grandfather, to my grandmother, asking for acknowledgement, for a relationship, for anything. And every single one had been intercepted by my grandmother. She'd written responses, cold and legal, threatening restraining orders if he continued to reach out. She'd blocked him at every turn, protecting the family secret, protecting my grandfather's reputation, protecting the perfect image they'd built over decades. I sat in that attic for hours, reading through everything, my hands shaking. Part of me wanted to put it all back, to pretend I'd never found it, to give the safe, sanitized eulogy everyone was expecting. But another part of me, the part that kept reading those letters from Michael, begging just to know his father, couldn't let it go. This man had spent 45 years wondering about half of his identity, and my family had spent 45 years denying his existence. I didn't sleep the night before the funeral. I rewrote the eulogy a dozen times, trying to figure out what to say, how to say it, whether I should say anything at all. And in the end, I decided that if my grandfather had wanted honesty, if he'd kept those journals knowing someone might find them someday, then maybe this was his way of asking for the truth to come out. The funeral started normally enough. Music, prayers, the usual rituals. When it was time for my speech, I walked up to the podium, looked out at the sea of faces, and started with the expected stories. I talked about his work ethic, his love for his family, his impact on the community. People nodded along, some dabbed at their eyes with tissues. It was going exactly how everyone thought it would. Then I paused. I took a breath, and I said, Grandpa kept secrets, and I think he'd want honesty now. The room shifted. You could feel it, the sudden tension, people sitting up straighter, wondering where this was going. I told them everything about Linda, about the affair, about the child he'd fathered and paid to disappear, about Michael, who'd spent decades trying to find his family, only to be blocked and threatened and ignored. And then I said that Michael was here, in the audience, because I'd invited him. The funeral home went completely silent, not the respectful silence of mourning, but the shocked, suffocating silence of a secret being dragged into the light. I pointed to where Michael was sitting, in the back row, and people turned to look at him like he was a ghost. He looked terrified, but he stood up when I gestured for him to, and he nodded at the crowd. My grandmother stood up. She didn't say a word. She just grabbed her purse, walked out of the funeral home, and half the family followed her. Aunts, uncles, cousins, all of them filing out in silence, choosing her side, choosing the secret over the truth. The other half stayed, frozen in their seats, staring at me like I'd just detonated a bomb in the middle of the service. Oh, so we're doing that now? I finished the eulogy somehow. I don't even remember what I said after the reveal. Something about forgiveness, about family, about how we can't change the past, but we can choose how we move forward. It sounded hollow even to me, but I got through it. And then I stepped down from the podium and the funeral director quickly moved us into the next part of the service, probably just to get through it as fast as possible. Michael found me afterward, outside, while people were awkwardly milling around, trying to decide whether to come to the burial or just leave. He thanked me. He said he'd been in therapy for years trying to process the rejection, the not knowing, the feeling of being erased from his own history. He said he didn't expect me to invite him, didn't expect anyone in the family to acknowledge him, and that what I'd done meant more than I could know. We talked for over an hour. He told me about his life, his mum, how she'd done her best to raise him alone after my grandfather paid her off. He showed me pictures of his kids, my grandfather's grandchildren, who nobody in the family knew existed, and I realized that by keeping the secret, by protecting the perfect image, my grandmother hadn't just hurt Michael. She'd robbed all of us of family, of connection, of people who could have been part of our lives. Things went from bad to unhinged. My grandmother died 2 months later. Heart attack, sudden and unexpected. And in those 2 months, she never spoke to me again. Not a word, not a text, nothing. My mum tried to play mediator, begging me to apologize, to make peace before it was too late. But I couldn't, because I didn't think I'd done anything wrong. My grandfather kept those journals for a reason. He could have destroyed them, burned them, made sure nobody ever found out. But he didn't. And I think, in his own way, he wanted the truth to come out. He just didn't have the courage to do it himself. At my grandmother's funeral, the family was split. Half of them still weren't speaking to me. The other half had come around, slowly, some of them even reaching out to Michael, trying to build bridges. My mum gave the eulogy this time, and she kept it safe, traditional, everything my grandmother's had been. Nobody mentioned secrets, nobody mentioned Michael. It was like my grandfather's funeral had never happened. But Michael was there, sitting in the back again, but this time with a few family members sitting next to him, acknowledging him, including him. And when it was over, when everyone was filing out, one of my uncles, someone who'd walked out of my grandfather's funeral in protest, came up to me. He didn't apologize, but he shook my hand, and he said, "You did the right thing. I don't regret it, not for a second. My grandmother died angry at me, and that hurts. But Michael got his family. He got answers. He got to know where he came from, to meet siblings and cousins and nieces and nephews who share his blood. And sometimes doing the right thing means losing people who can't handle the truth. Funerals reveal truths. Workplaces, they reveal enemies. And sometimes those enemies are your own team. Our project failed spectacularly. $2 million over budget, 6 months late, and a product that barely functioned when we finally shipped it. The post-mortem meeting was scheduled for a Monday morning, and I walked in knowing it was going to be bad. What I didn't expect was for my entire team to turn on me like a pack of wolves. They went around the table one by one, explaining how the project had gone wrong. And according to them, every single failure traced back to me. I'd ignored their warnings about timeline issues. I'd made unilateral decisions without consulting anyone. I'd dismissed their concerns about budget overruns. I'd refused to listen to feedback. By the time the fourth person finished talking, my manager was nodding along like this all made perfect sense. I sat there, stunned, watching my colleagues rewrite history in real time. My manager wrapped up the meeting by saying I'd be placed on probation for 90 days while they evaluated whether I was a good fit for the team. He said this failure had damaged the department's reputation and that leadership needed to see accountability. I was told to improve my communication skills, be more collaborative, and take responsibility for my mistakes. I left that conference room feeling like I'd been hit by a truck. Here's the thing though, I'd seen this coming. Not the exact scenario, but I'd sensed the hostility building for months. Ever since I got promoted to lead this project, my team had been cold. Short responses to emails, missed meetings, passive-aggressive comments in Slack. They'd never forgiven me for getting the promotion over some of them, and I'd known, somewhere in the back of my mind, that they were going to make me pay for it eventually. So I'd been covering my tracks, every email, every Slack thread, every meeting note. I'd been forwarding to my personal account. I had a folder on my personal laptop with months of documentation, showing exactly how this project had actually unfolded. And it told a very different story than the one my team had just presented. The level of pettiness was almost impressive. I went home that night and started going through everything. I built a timeline, chronological and detailed, showing every decision point in the project. I pulled screenshots of Slack conversations where I'd asked for input and been ignored, emails where I'd requested updates and gotten vague non-answers, meeting notes where I'd proposed solutions and had them rejected without explanation. I found messages where team members had actively withheld information from me, discussing project issues in private channels I wasn't included in, and then acting surprised when I didn't address problems I'd never been told about. I found emails where I'd flagged budget concerns early and been told not to worry about it. Slack threads where I'd asked for deadline confirmations and been given dates that were completely unrealistic, then blamed when we missed them. I found evidence of team members deliberately missing deadlines, then claiming they'd never agreed to those timelines in the first place. And I found proof that they'd rejected my proposals not because they were bad ideas, but specifically because they came from me. It took me 3 days to compile everything into a document, 40 pages, single-spaced, with timestamps and screenshots and direct quotes. I organized it by category: communication failures, missed deadlines, budget issues, sabotage. Yes, sabotage, because that's what it was. This wasn't incompetence or miscommunication. This was deliberate, coordinated effort to make me fail. I sent it to the VP on Thursday morning. I CC'd the entire department, including my manager, my team, and HR. I wrote a short cover email explaining that I wanted to provide context for the project failure and that I believed the post-mortem meeting had contained several inaccuracies that needed to be corrected. Then I attached the document and hit send. The response was immediate. My manager called me within 20 minutes, furious, demanding to know why I'd gone over his head. I told him I was simply providing documentation to support my position, which seemed reasonable given that I was on probation for failures that weren't actually my fault. He told me I was making things worse for myself. I said I'd take my chances. He hung up on me. The VP called an hour later. His tone was very different. He said he'd read the entire document, that he was looking into the situation, and that I should take the rest of the day off while leadership reviewed everything. I asked if I was in trouble. He said no, but that there were going to be some conversations happening, and it would be better if I wasn't in the office. I logged off and waited. What happened next? Nobody saw it coming. Within 48 hours, 3 team members were fired. Not put on probation, not given warnings, fired. The evidence was too clear, too damning. They deliberately sabotaged a multi-million-dollar project because they were bitter about a promotion. My manager wasn't fired, but he was demoted, removed from his leadership position and reassigned to an individual contributor role in a different department. The official reason was failure to properly oversee his team and address clear performance issues, but everyone knew it was because he'd either participated in the sabotage or been too incompetent to notice it happening. I was removed from probation immediately. The VP sent a formal apology letter, acknowledging that I'd been unfairly blamed for failures that were not my responsibility and committing to a full audit of the project to understand what had actually gone wrong. That apology was CC'd to the same distribution list I'd used for my document. Everyone in the department saw it. The project was audited by an outside consulting firm. They reviewed everything, interviewed people, analyzed the timeline. Their report, which took 6 weeks to complete, basically confirmed everything I'd documented. The project had been sabotaged. My recommendations, the ones that had been rejected during development, were sound. They suggested implementing them immediately on the next version. The company did. They assigned a new team, gave them my original proposals, and told them to build it right this time. It launched 4 months later, came in under budget, and actually worked. Funny how that happens when people do their jobs instead of trying to destroy each other. My former team members tried to do damage control. One of them reached out to apologize, saying they'd gotten caught up in group dynamics and made bad choices. I didn't respond. Another one posted on LinkedIn about learning from mistakes and the importance of integrity, which was rich coming from someone who'd just been fired for sabotage. The third one apparently tried to claim wrongful termination, but given the documentation, that went nowhere. My former manager sent me an email months later asking for a reference for a job he was applying for. I deleted it without responding. I'm still at the company. I got promoted again, actually 6 months after the whole thing wrapped up. Different department, bigger team, better pay, and this time nobody questions whether I deserve it. They've seen what happens when people try to undermine me. Turns out when you document everything and present facts instead of feelings, it's pretty hard to argue with the results. People ask me sometimes if I feel bad about getting those 3 people fired. Honest answer, no. They made a choice to sabotage a project, waste company resources, and destroy my reputation to soothe their own egos. They could have just done their jobs. They could have been professional. They chose differently, and choices have consequences. Sabotage is one thing, but being systematically replaced without your knowledge, that's a special kind of corporate cruelty. My boss asked me to mentor a new hire named Sarah for 3 months. He framed it as a growth opportunity for me, said it would look great on my performance review, that mentoring was a key leadership skill. I was flattered, honestly. I'd been with the company for 5 years, built up a solid client base, developed processes and strategies that had become integral to how our department operated. Being asked to pass that knowledge on felt like recognition, like I was valued enough that they wanted to replicate my success. So I threw myself into it. I taught Sarah everything, my client management techniques, the proprietary strategies I'd spent years refining, the relationships I'd cultivated with our biggest accounts. I showed her my email templates, my tracking systems, the little shortcuts and insights that made my work efficient. She was eager, always taking notes, asking thoughtful questions, staying late to shadow me on calls. She seemed genuinely grateful, constantly thanking me for my patience and telling me how much she was learning. I loved helping her. There's something satisfying about watching someone grow under your guidance, seeing them grasp concepts that took you years to figure out. Sarah picked things up quickly. Within a month, she was handling smaller client interactions on her own. By month 2, she was sitting in on my major account meetings, contributing ideas, building rapport. I was proud of her progress. I thought I was building a strong team member, maybe even a future peer. I had no idea I was training my own replacement. It happened on a random Tuesday afternoon. Sarah had stepped away from her desk for a meeting and left her email open on her monitor. I wasn't snooping. I was dropping off some files she'd asked for and glanced at her screen out of habit. And there it was, an email from my boss with my name in the subject line. Once you've absorbed everything from OP, we'll transition her clients to you and restructure her role. Phase 1 complete by end of Q2. I stood there staring at those words, my brain refusing to process what I was reading. I scrolled up through the email chain, months of correspondence, my boss detailing which of my clients to prioritize learning, which strategies were most valuable, timelines for when Sarah would be ready to take over my accounts entirely. He'd hired her specifically to replace me, and he'd used me to train her, exploiting my willingness to help and my trust in leadership to make his transition seamless. The restructure her role part was corporate speak for demotion or elimination. They were planning to push me out, and I'd been enthusiastically participating in my own obsolescence. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. 5 years of loyalty, of staying late and going above expectations, of building relationships and revenue, and this was how they repaid me. By lying to my face and manipulating me into making myself replaceable. But that wasn't even the worst part. I dug deeper into Sarah's emails while she was gone, found entire folders dedicated to what she and my boss called Project Transition. Detailed notes on every client I managed, assessments of which relationships were strong enough to survive a handoff, strategies for minimizing pushback when they announced the change. There were even talking points prepared for how to explain my restructure to the team. They'd thought of everything, except the possibility that I might find out before they were ready. I stopped training Sarah immediately, just completely shut it down. When she came back from her meeting and asked about our afternoon session, I told her something came up and I needed to focus on my own work. She looked confused but didn't push. The next day, same thing, and the day after that. By the end of the week, my boss noticed. He called me into his office with this concerned expression, asking if everything was okay with the mentorship, saying Sarah had mentioned I seemed distant. I looked him right in the eye and said I'd been doing some reflecting on my workload and didn't think I had the bandwidth to continue training while managing my accounts. He tried to insist it was important, that Sarah needed my guidance. I just smiled and said I was sure she'd figure it out. Then came the breaking point. He sent me an email later that day, more forceful this time, saying the mentorship wasn't optional and that I needed to prioritize it per his original directive. So I hit reply, attached screenshots of every email from his correspondence with Sarah, and wrote one sentence. I believe there's been a misunderstanding about my role in Project Transition. Then I copied HR. His response came within minutes. A meeting request marked urgent. I declined it. Instead, I spent the next hour making calls to my 3 largest clients, the ones who'd worked with me exclusively for years. I explained that I was leaving the company to start my own consultancy and asked if they'd be interested in continuing our working relationship independently. All 3 said yes immediately. They'd contracted with me personally, not the company. The agreements were structured in a way that allowed it. I quit on the spot, walked into my boss's office, handed him a printed resignation letter effective immediately, and told him I'd be taking my clients with me per the terms of their contracts. His face went white. He started stammering about non-competes and company property. I reminded him I'd had our legal team review my employment agreement years ago, and there was no non-compete clause. The clients had personal service contracts. Everything was airtight. Sarah was standing in the hallway when I walked out with my box of personal items. She looked terrified, probably realizing that without me there to finish her training, she was about to be thrown into accounts she wasn't ready to handle. I didn't say anything to her. She was just a pawn in this. My boss was the architect. I started my consultancy the following week. My 3 former clients became my foundation, and word spread quickly in the industry that I'd gone independent. Within 2 months, I had more business than I could handle. I hired an assistant, then another consultant, built exactly the kind of operation I'd always wanted, without the corporate politics and backstabbing. Sarah was fired 3 months later. I heard through former co-workers that she'd completely fumbled the remaining accounts, couldn't replicate my results, and my boss ended up having to take over damage control himself. Turns out watching someone work and actually being able to do the work are very different things. She'd learned the mechanics but not the instincts, the relationships, the years of experience that made those strategies effective. My old boss reached out last week, sent me a LinkedIn message asking if I was hiring, saying he'd heard my consultancy was growing and thought his experience might be valuable to my team. The audacity of it actually made me laugh out loud. I didn't respond. Some questions don't deserve answers. At least I saw the betrayal in writing. But sometimes the person you trust most doesn't even need emails, just your blind loyalty and their calculated silence. My best friend Riley had 500,000 Instagram followers as a life coach and wellness guru. She posted daily about healing, growth, overcoming adversity, all the polished inspirational content that people eat up. Her feed was perfectly curated pastel graphics and aesthetic mirror selfies with captions about self-love and breaking generational trauma. She had sponsorships, a podcast, an online course that sold for $3,000. From the outside, she looked like she had it all figured out. I'd been confiding in her for 15 years. We met in high school, became inseparable, went through everything together. Or so I thought. I told her about my eating disorder, the years of recovery, the relapses nobody else knew about. I told her about my family trauma, the stuff I couldn't even say out loud to a therapist at first. I told her about my failed engagement, the the mental health struggles that followed, the nights I didn't think I'd make it through. She was my person, the one I trusted with everything. Then I started seeing my stories in her content. At first, I thought it was a coincidence. She posted about struggling with body image, and I thought, well, lots of people deal with that. But then the details got too specific. She talked about a family member's addiction using the exact phrasing I'd used when telling her about my uncle. She shared a story about a broken engagement that matched mine beat for beat, down to the restaurant where it happened. She posted about a panic attack in a grocery store that I'd texted her about 2 weeks earlier. She'd repackaged my pain as her own journey. She was monetizing my trauma in sponsored posts for wellness apps and therapy platforms. My eating disorder recovery became her transformation story in an ad for a nutrition company. My family trauma became a module in her online course about healing childhood wounds. She never asked permission. She never even told me she was doing it. When I finally put it all together, I felt sick. I went back through months of her content, screenshotting everything, cross-referencing it with my therapy journal entries and our text conversations. The timestamps didn't lie. I'd tell her something in confidence, and within days or weeks, it would appear on her Instagram as her own experience. She'd built her entire platform, her entire brand, on stories that weren't hers. I confronted her privately first. I sent her a long message laying it all out, asking her why, giving her a chance to explain. Her response came back within minutes. She said I was jealous of her success, that I couldn't handle seeing her thrive, that everyone shares inspiration and I was being dramatic. She actually used the word dramatic. Like I was overreacting to her stealing my life and selling it to strangers. You almost have to admire the audacity. I asked her to take the post down, to stop using my stories. She said no. She said her content was transformative, that she'd made it her own, that I didn't own the concept of struggle. She told me I should be grateful she was helping people by sharing these experiences. Grateful, like she was doing me a favor by commodifying my trauma. That's when I decided to go public. I spent 2 days putting together a side-by-side comparison. Her Instagram posts on one side, my therapy journal entries and text messages to her on the other, all with timestamps. The evidence was damning. She'd post about a breakthrough moment, and I'd have a journal entry from 3 weeks earlier describing the exact same thing. She'd share a vulnerable story about hitting rock bottom, and I'd have texts to her from a month before where I'd told her about that exact moment in my life. I posted everything. I didn't editorialize, didn't add commentary, just let the screenshots speak for themselves. I explained that I'd trusted her with my most painful experiences, and she'd turned them into content without my knowledge or consent. I tagged her. I made it public. Her followers turned on her immediately. The comments came flooding in within minutes. People calling her a fraud, a liar, a fake. Other people started coming forward with their own stories, saying they'd confided in her and seen their experiences show up in her content too. Someone who'd taken her $3,000 course said half the material was clearly lifted from other people's lives. The posts started getting shared, reposted, circulated through wellness communities and influencer watch accounts. But that wasn't even the worst part. Her sponsors started dropping her. The wellness apps, the therapy platforms, the meditation companies, all of them pulled their partnerships within 48 hours. They didn't want to be associated with someone who'd been exposed for stealing other people's trauma. Her affiliate links got deactivated. Her podcast lost its sponsorships. The online course platform she used sent her a notice that they were reviewing her content for ethical violations. She lost 200,000 followers in a week. Every day I'd check and the number would be lower. People were unfollowing in droves, leaving comments on her old posts calling her out, demanding refunds for her course. She tried to do damage control, posting apologies that blamed me for misunderstanding, saying she'd been inspired by our conversations, but never claimed the experiences were hers. But people weren't buying it. The timestamps proved she'd presented my stories as her own. Riley threatened legal action. Her lawyer sent me a cease and desist, claiming I'd defamed her, damaged her business, violated her privacy by sharing our private conversations. I sent back my own letter threatening to countersue for emotional distress, unauthorized use of my personal information, and fraud. I had screenshots of everything. I had proof she'd monetized my trauma without consent. Her lawyer backed off, and suddenly the whole plan fell apart. 2 weeks after I posted the evidence, Riley deleted all her accounts. Instagram, TikTok, her podcast, her course website, everything just vanished. No final statement, no explanation, just gone. I heard through mutual friends that she'd moved back in with her parents, that she was facing financial trouble because her entire income had been built on the influencer career that just imploded. Some of those mutual friends reached out to me, asking if I felt bad, if I thought I'd gone too far. They said Riley was struggling, that I'd ruined her life, that maybe I should have handled it privately. I told them I did handle it privately. She chose to dismiss me, to gaslight me, to keep profiting off my pain. Going public was the only option she left me. I don't regret it, not even a little bit. Riley had 15 years to be a real friend. She chose to be a content creator instead. She chose to see my vulnerability as material, my trust as a resource to exploit. And when she got caught, when the carefully constructed image fell apart, that wasn't my fault. That was hers. I still have the screenshots saved. Just in case she ever tries to come back, to rebuild, to start over with a new account and a new aesthetic and the same old tricks. Because some people never actually learn. They just get better at hiding. Influencers sell illusions, but some people sell something far more dangerous: fake sympathy. A coworker named Emma claimed her mother died of cancer. She sent a company-wide email explaining that her mum had been battling the disease for months and had finally lost the fight. The email was heartbreaking, detailed, talking about her mother's strength and courage and how the medical bills had drained the family's savings. She said she was starting a GoFundMe to help cover funeral expenses and asked if anyone could share it or contribute. The office rallied immediately. People were forwarding the fundraiser to friends and family. Our manager sent out another email encouraging everyone to donate if they could. Within 2 weeks, we'd raised $12,000. 12,000. People who barely knew Emma were chipping in $50, $100 at a time because nobody wants to be the person who doesn't help someone through a tragedy. Emma took bereavement leave. She was gone for almost 3 weeks, and when she came back, she was wearing all black, looking exhausted, accepting hugs and condolences from everyone who stopped by her desk. She'd posted grief content all over Facebook during her leave. Photos of candles, quotes about loss, vague posts about how hard it was to say goodbye. People from the office were commenting with hearts and prayers and supportive messages. It all seemed completely legitimate. Except then someone noticed something strange. Emma's mother had commented on one of her grief posts. Not an old comment from before, a new comment, posted 3 days after the supposed funeral. It said something casual, asking Emma about brunch plans for the weekend and whether she wanted to try that new cafe downtown. The comment was public. Anyone could see it. At first, people thought maybe it was a different account, some kind of memorial page or something. But no, it was definitely her mother's real account. Same profile picture, same name, years of post history. And she wasn't just commenting on that one post. She was active, liking things, sharing recipes, commenting on friends' photos. Very much alive. The whole thing unraveled fast. I took screenshots of everything. The grief posts, the mother's comments, the GoFundMe description claiming funeral expenses. I sent it all to HR in a detailed email explaining what I'd found. I also sent it to the group chat we'd created for coordinating donations, the one with about 30 co-workers in it. I didn't add commentary. I just shared the screenshots and let people draw their own conclusions. The group chat exploded. People were confused at first, then angry, then absolutely furious. Someone called the number listed on Emma's emergency contact form and got her mother on the phone, very much alive and very confused about why someone from her daughter's work was calling to offer condolences. Turns out Emma's mother had no idea any of this was happening. She didn't know about the GoFundMe, didn't know Emma had told everyone she was dead, didn't know $12,000 had been raised in her name. HR called Emma in immediately. She tried to deny it at first, claiming it was a different mother figure, someone who'd been like a mum to her who had actually passed away. But that excuse fell apart the second HR pulled up the Facebook screenshots showing her actual biological mother commenting on posts. Emma broke down and admitted the truth. She needed money for debt, credit cards, and student loans she couldn't pay. She didn't think the fundraiser would go this far. She thought maybe a few people would donate $100 total and she could quietly shut it down. Like that makes it better somehow. She was fired immediately, not put on leave pending investigation, not given a chance to resign quietly. Fired on the spot, escorted out of the building by security while the entire office watched. HR sent a company-wide email that afternoon explaining that Emma's employment had been terminated due to fraudulent activity and that anyone who donated to the GoFundMe should preserve their records because legal action was being pursued. Criminal charges were filed within a week. Fraud, theft by deception, a bunch of technical legal terms that all boiled down to the fact that Emma had scammed dozens of people out of thousands of dollars by lying about a dead parent. The district attorney's office took it seriously because of the amount involved and the number of victims. This wasn't some small-time lie, it was organized fraud. Emma had to repay every single donor. The court ordered full restitution as part of her bail conditions. She liquidated everything she could, sold her car, moved back in with her very much alive mother, and started making payments. Some people got their money back within a month. Others are still waiting because Emma's broke and can only pay in tiny installments. The company released a public statement. Nothing too detailed, but enough to explain that an employee had engaged in fraudulent fundraising activity, had been terminated, and that the company was cooperating fully with law enforcement. They also implemented new policies about workplace fundraising, requiring verification for any campaigns involving medical expenses or deaths. Emma had poisoned the well for anyone who might actually need help in the future. The fallout in the office was ugly. People felt betrayed, humiliated for having believed her, angry at themselves for not questioning anything. Some people had donated significant amounts, money they couldn't really afford to lose. One guy had given $500 because his own mother had died of cancer, and Emma's story hit close to home. He was devastated when he found out it was fake. Emma's facing up to 3 years in prison. Her lawyer tried to argue for probation, claiming she had mental health issues and had made a terrible mistake in a moment of desperation. The prosecutor pointed out that this wasn't a moment. It was weeks of calculated deception. Fake posts, fake tears, fake grief, all carefully constructed to extract money from people who trusted her. The trial is next month. I'll probably have to testify since I was the one who initially reported it to HR. Part of me feels weird about that, like I'm the villain in her story somehow. But then I remember that she lied about her mother being dead, accepted condolences from people who'd lost real loved ones, and pocketed $12,000 meant for a funeral that never happened. Courtrooms are filled with liars, but sometimes justice happens in real time, in the most public way imaginable. My boyfriend Kyle and I went to a basketball game with his coworker Ashley. He'd mentioned her a few times over the past couple months, always casually, always in the context of work stuff, project deadlines, office drama, the usual. When he suggested she join us for the game because she was a huge fan and had never been to this arena, I didn't think twice about it. I actually thought it was nice that he was being friendly with his coworkers, that he wanted to include me in those relationships. Ashley was great, honestly. Funny, easygoing, knew her basketball stats better than both of us combined. We grabbed beers before the game, talked about everything from terrible bosses to our favorite true crime podcasts. I genuinely liked her. The three of us found our seats, and the energy in the arena was electric. It was one of those playoff games where everyone's on their feet, the crowd's deafening, and you can feel the tension in every play. Halftime came and the usual arena entertainment started. Dancers, t-shirt cannons, the mascot doing backflips, and then the kiss cam. It's always the same, couples on the jumbotron, some shy, some hamming it up for the crowd. Everyone around us was laughing and cheering as the camera panned across different sections. I was barely paying attention, just enjoying my overpriced nachos and the break from the game's intensity. Then the camera landed on our section, on Kyle and Ashley. The arena erupted in cheers, 20,000 people screaming, clapping, chanting, "Kiss, kiss, kiss," like it was the most natural thing in the world. I was sitting right there, on Kyle's other side, completely out of frame, and I watched in what felt like slow motion as Kyle turned to Ashley, as she smiled at him, and as they kissed. Not a quick peck, not an awkward forced thing for the camera. A real kiss, the kind where you can tell it's not the first time. The crowd went wild. People were cheering, whistling, giving them standing ovations, and I just sat there, frozen, nachos forgotten in my lap, staring up at the jumbotron showing my boyfriend kissing another woman while I was literally sitting 18 inches away from him. Kyle pulled away from her and his eyes immediately found mine. The color drained from his face so fast I thought he might actually pass out. Ashley looked over at me too, and her expression shifted from smiling to absolutely horrified in the span of a second. She'd known I was there. They'd both known, and they'd done it anyway. The camera had already moved on to another couple. The arena was still buzzing with energy, and I stood up without saying a word, grabbed my bag, and walked out. I didn't run. I didn't cry. I just left, navigating through the rows of seats while Kyle called my name behind me, his voice getting swallowed up by the noise of the crowd. I made it to my car before my phone started blowing up. Text after text from Kyle, call after call. I ignored all of it and drove home in complete silence, my brain still trying to process what had just happened. When I finally looked at my phone an hour later, I had 63 notifications, messages from friends, tags on social media, links to videos. The kiss cam moment had gone viral. People in the arena had recorded it, posted it to Twitter, TikTok, Instagram. Within 2 hours, it had been shared thousands of times. And because our city isn't that big, people who knew me started recognizing the situation, tagging me, asking if I was okay, pointing out that there was clearly another person sitting right next to the couple on the kiss cam. And here's where it gets absurd. Kyle's excuses started rolling in. Long paragraphs of text explaining that it was just for the camera, that it didn't mean anything, that the crowd was pressuring them, and it would have been awkward to refuse. He said I was overreacting, that I was making a big deal out of nothing, that if I'd just answer his calls, he could explain everything. Ashley sent messages too, apologizing but also saying it was just a silly kiss cam moment and that I was blowing things out of proportion. The gaslighting was almost impressive in its audacity. They'd kissed on a jumbotron in front of 20,000 people and millions more online, and somehow I was the one being unreasonable for being upset about it. I spent that night scrolling through the videos people had posted, reading comments from strangers who'd picked up on the fact that there was clearly something wrong with the picture. Some people thought it was hilarious. Others were pointing out that you could see someone sitting next to the guy, speculating about whether it was his girlfriend or wife. The video was spreading faster than I could keep track of, showing up on sports blogging sites, relationship drama pages, even making it onto a few local news segments as a viral moment from the game. Kyle showed up at my apartment the next morning. I didn't let him in. He stood in the hallway trying to explain, saying Ashley and I had gotten along so well that he thought maybe we could all be friends, that the kiss was a mistake, that he'd panicked when the camera was on them. None of it made sense. None of it explained why they'd kissed like that, why they'd looked so comfortable doing it, why neither of them had hesitated. I told him through the door that we were done. He started crying, begging me to reconsider, saying he loved me and it was all a misunderstanding. I asked him how long he'd been seeing Ashley. The silence that followed told me everything I needed to know. That afternoon, I posted the video myself, downloaded the clearest version I could find, uploaded it to my social media with a simple caption: "When the kiss cam does the breakup for you." I tagged Kyle, I tagged Ashley, and I let the internet do what the internet does best. 2 million views in 3 days. The comments were a mix of support, outrage, and morbid fascination. People were digging through Kyle's and Ashley's profiles, finding old photos, speculating about timelines. My friends rallied around me, flooding my messages with support and offers to key his car, which I appreciated but declined. Some of Kyle's friends tried to defend him, saying I was being vindictive by posting it publicly. I didn't engage. The video spoke for itself. Kyle and Ashley are reportedly still together. I heard through mutual friends that they're trying to lay low, that Kyle's embarrassed by the whole thing going viral, that Ashley deactivated most of her social media. Part of me feels bad for the public humiliation they're facing, but a bigger part of me remembers sitting in that arena, watching them kiss while I was invisible to everyone but them. And that part feels absolutely nothing. I'm very single now, very deliberately, very contentedly single. I went on a few dates, joined a book club, started taking pottery classes. I'm doing the whole rediscover yourself after a breakup thing, and honestly, it's not half bad. My friends joke that I should send a thank you card to whoever operated the kiss cam that night. In a weird way, they did me a favor. Better to find out in a stadium full of witnesses than to waste more time on someone who was already checked out. Public humiliation has a certain poetic justice to it, but sometimes the worst betrayals happen in private, where gaslighting can thrive unchecked. For months, my girlfriend told me I was paranoid and insecure. Every time I questioned her late nights at the office or her sudden girls' trips on weekends I hadn't heard about until the day before, she'd turn it around on me. She'd say I was being controlling, that I didn't trust her, that my jealousy was toxic and exhausting. She made me feel guilty for even asking basic questions like who she was with or when she'd be home. I started doubting myself. Maybe I was paranoid. Maybe I did have trust issues. She'd point out that I'd been cheated on in a previous relationship and suggest that I was projecting old trauma onto her. She was so convincing, so consistent in her responses, that I genuinely started to believe something was wrong with me. I made an appointment with a therapist specifically to work on what I thought were my trust issues. I spent sessions talking about why I couldn't just relax and accept her explanations, why I felt this constant nagging suspicion that something was off. My therapist asked good questions. She wanted to know what specifically was triggering my anxiety. So I laid it out. The late nights that turned into overnights with vague explanations. The girls' trips where she'd be unreachable for hours. The way she'd started password protecting her phone after years of leaving it unlocked. The sudden interest in going to the gym at odd hours. My therapist didn't immediately dismiss my concerns like I expected. Instead, she suggested keeping a journal of specific instances that made me uncomfortable, not to build a case, but to see if there were patterns. I did, and the patterns were everywhere. But every time I brought something up to my girlfriend, she'd gaslight me so effectively that I'd end up apologizing for doubting her. She'd cry sometimes, saying I was ruining our relationship with my insecurity, that she couldn't live like this, under constant suspicion. I felt like the villain in my own relationship. Then a stranger DM'd me on Instagram. Her name was Rachel. Her message was brief and to the point. I think you should see this. Attached were photos. My girlfriend with another man, kissing at a restaurant I recognized from one of her supposed girls' nights, holding hands walking through a park, entering an apartment building together at midnight. The photos were time-stamped, dated, recent. Some of them were from the previous week. I stared at my phone, my hands shaking, feeling this strange mix of vindication and devastation. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't paranoid. I'd been right the entire time, and she'd made me feel insane for trusting my own perceptions. Rachel sent another message explaining who she was. She was the other guy's ex-girlfriend. She'd been tracking him because she suspected he was cheating on his current girlfriend, who happened to be my girlfriend cheating on me with him. Rachel had months of evidence, photos, screenshots of texts she'd recovered from an old shared cloud account he'd forgotten to remove her from, timestamps and locations that mapped out an entire secret relationship. She said she was sending this to me because she felt I deserved to know, and because she wanted both of us to confront them publicly. I didn't know Rachel, had never met her, but in that moment she felt like the only honest person in my life. But that wasn't even the worst part. I went through everything Rachel sent. There were dozens of photos spanning back 6 months. 6 months of my girlfriend living a double life while telling me I was the problem. There were screenshots of texts where she complained about me to him, calling me clingy and paranoid, laughing about how easy it was to manipulate me into feeling guilty. There were messages where they planned their meetups around my work schedule, where they joked about close calls when I'd almost caught them. Reading those texts felt like being hollowed out. She hadn't just cheated, she'd actively mocked me for noticing, had weaponized my emotions against me, had turned my legitimate concerns into character flaws she could exploit. And I'd believed her. I'd actually gone to therapy thinking I was the broken one. I sent everything to my girlfriend. Just forwarded the entire conversation from Rachel with one message. You made me think I was losing my mind. She read it immediately. The typing indicator appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Finally, a response came through. She didn't deny it, didn't apologize. She said I drove her to it with my insecurity, that I'd pushed her away with my constant questioning, that she'd needed someone who trusted her. She actually blamed me for her cheating because I'd been suspicious of her cheating. The circular logic was almost impressive. I didn't respond. Instead, I posted the entire DM thread publicly on my Instagram story. Every photo, every screenshot, every timestamp. I tagged both my girlfriend and the guy she'd been seeing. I included Rachel's messages explaining how she'd discovered everything, and I wrote a caption explaining that I'd spent months being told I was paranoid and insecure, had gone to therapy to fix my trust issues, and had finally received proof that my instincts were right all along. The response was immediate and overwhelming. My girlfriend started getting tagged by mutual friends demanding explanations. Her phone must have been exploding because within 20 minutes, she'd posted her own response claiming I'd invaded her privacy and violated her trust by sharing private photos without consent. The irony of a cheater talking about violated trust wasn't lost on anyone. Friends who'd previously told me to relax and stop being so paranoid started sending apologies. People who'd witnessed her gaslighting me at parties and gatherings were commenting about how they'd suspected something was off but hadn't wanted to get involved. The guy she'd been seeing deleted his Instagram entirely within an hour. My girlfriend held out longer, trying to control the narrative, but the evidence was too clear and too public. She lost multiple friend groups overnight. People she'd been close with for years stopped speaking to her. Mutual friends had to choose sides, and most of them chose mine once they saw the extent of the manipulation. Her reputation in our social circle completely disintegrated. The girls she'd supposedly been on trips with came forward saying she'd lied about those too, that they'd had no idea she was using them as alibis. Things went from bad to unhinged. My girlfriend showed up at my apartment 2 days later, crying, begging me to take down the posts. She said I'd ruined her life, that people were harassing her, that she'd lost friends, and her family was asking questions she couldn't answer. She wanted me to tell everyone it was a misunderstanding, that we'd worked it out privately. I asked her if she was sorry for cheating or sorry for getting caught. She didn't answer. I closed the door. My therapist called the whole thing validating in our next session. She said my perceptions had been incredibly accurate and that what I'd experienced was textbook gaslighting. She apologized for not pushing harder when I'd first described the situations, said sometimes therapists can accidentally enable abuse by focusing too much on the client's potential issues rather than questioning the partner's behavior. We shifted our sessions from trust issues to recovery from emotional manipulation. I kept the posts up for a week before finally archiving them. Not because I felt bad, but because I was done. The point had been made. Everyone who needed to know the truth knew it. Rachel and I stayed in touch for a bit, comparing notes on our respective liars, but eventually we both just wanted to move on. My ex tried to reach out a few months later with a long apology text. She said she'd been in therapy too, that she realized what she'd done was wrong, that she wanted closure. I didn't respond. Some people don't deserve closure. They deserve exactly what they get. Gaslighting works until the evidence becomes undeniable. And when people try to bury you online, sometimes all you need is one perfectly timed screenshot. After I quit a toxic startup, the CEO posted on LinkedIn that I'd been terminated for performance issues and was unprofessional and unreliable. I didn't quit, by the way. I resigned with 2 weeks' notice, citing a hostile work environment and unethical business practices. But according to his post, I was fired. According to his carefully crafted narrative, I'd failed to meet expectations, had caused problems with team morale, and had left the company in a difficult position. His post got 10,000 views in the first day. Comments from industry people I respected, saying they were disappointed to hear about my conduct, that they'd thought better of me. Reactions from connections I'd made over years of networking, quietly distancing themselves. And then the real damage started. Recruiters who'd been in touch with me about positions went silent. Job offers that had been in final stages suddenly evaporated. I'd get to the last round of interviews and then get vague rejections about culture fit or going in a different direction. He was destroying my reputation to cover his own failures. The startup was bleeding money, missing deadlines, and losing clients. And instead of taking responsibility, he'd decided to make me the scapegoat. One public post, a few hundred words of lies, and my career was suddenly in free fall. I spent a week trying to handle it professionally. I reached out to the CEO privately, asked him to retract the post, explained that it was factually incorrect and damaging my career. He told me I was being dramatic, that he had every right to share his perspective on former employees, and that maybe if I'd done better work, I wouldn't be in this situation. He actually said that, like he hadn't spent months pressuring me to falsify data, berating staff, and running the company into the ground through sheer incompetence. Then came the breaking point. I got a rejection from a company I'd been interviewing with for a senior position. They'd been enthusiastic, talking about next steps and start dates, and then suddenly it was a no. I asked for feedback, and the recruiter, after some hesitation, admitted they'd seen the LinkedIn post and had concerns about my professionalism. That's when I realized this wasn't going away on its own. The CEO's lie was now the official story, and unless I did something drastic, it was going to follow me for the rest of my career. So I started gathering evidence, everything I'd saved from my time at the startup: emails, Slack messages, documents, recordings. I'd been keeping records for months because I'd sensed things were heading somewhere bad. I just hadn't expected it to be this bad. I had emails from the CEO pressuring me to fudge user metrics for investor presentations, explicit instructions to inflate engagement numbers, to make our user base look larger than it was, to present growth that didn't exist. He'd been lying to investors about the company's performance, and he'd wanted me to help him do it. When I refused, that's when things got hostile. I had Slack messages where he berated employees with slurs, calling people incompetent, lazy, using language that would get you fired from any legitimate company. Messages sent at 2 in the morning, clearly written while drunk or worse, tearing into team members for minor mistakes or perceived slights. I had bank records showing he hadn't paid contractors for months. People who'd done work for the company, delivered what was promised, and then been strung along with excuses and delayed payments. Some of them had sent invoices 6, 7 times without getting paid. The company had money, it was venture funded, but the CEO was spending it on personal expenses and ignoring the people who actually kept the business running. And I had recordings, voice memos from meetings where he admitted the company was in trouble, where he talked about misrepresenting revenue to investors, where he discussed plans to blame various employees if things went south. I'd started recording meetings after he'd blamed me in front of the team for a decision he'd made. I wanted protection. Turns out I was right to be paranoid. I compiled everything into a comprehensive thread: screenshots, documents, audio clips, the whole arsenal. I wrote it up clearly and factually, no emotional appeals, just here's what actually happened and here's the proof. I explained that I'd quit because of these issues, that the CEO's LinkedIn post was retaliation for my refusal to participate in fraud, and that I had extensive documentation to back up every claim. I posted it everywhere: LinkedIn, Twitter, Reddit, every platform where tech industry people congregate. I tagged relevant journalists who cover startup culture and business ethics. I didn't tag the CEO directly, but I named the company and made it very easy for anyone to connect the dots. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Tech journalists picked it up within hours. Articles started appearing on industry blogs, sites that cover startup news and Silicon Valley drama. Investors who'd backed the company started asking questions. Current employees began reaching out to me privately, sharing their own horror stories, confirming everything I'd said and adding details I hadn't even known about. But that wasn't even the worst part. The investors pulled funding, not gradually, not after careful review, but within days. The company's lead investor released a statement saying they'd been misled about key metrics and were terminating their relationship with the company, effective immediately. Other investors followed. The startup's board called an emergency meeting. The CEO was asked to step down. He refused. The board voted him out anyway. The company folded within 6 weeks. Clients jumped ship, employees quit en masse, and without investor funding, there was no way to keep operating. The CEO sent me a legal threat, a cease and desist claiming I'd defamed him and demanding I remove all the posts and issue a public apology. My lawyer, who I'd consulted before posting anything, sent back a beautiful response reminding him that truth is an absolute defense against defamation. Every claim I'd made was documented and provable. If he wanted to sue, we'd be happy to present all the evidence in court, under oath, in front of a judge. He never filed. And here's where it gets absurd. I got 3 job offers from companies who saw my thread, not despite the controversy, because of it. They respected that I'd stood up to unethical practices, that I'd documented everything professionally, that I'd been willing to risk my reputation to expose fraud. One hiring manager told me they'd been looking for someone with integrity and a spine, and my thread had been better than any interview could have been. I accepted one of the offers: better pay, better culture, actual leadership that doesn't commit securities fraud. I started 2 months after posting the thread, and on my first day, several people mentioned they'd seen what happened and thought I'd handled it perfectly. The CEO is unemployed. Last I heard, he's facing legal action from some of the unpaid contractors and is being investigated by the SEC for the investor fraud. His LinkedIn profile has been scrubbed of the post about me, probably on advice of his lawyer. He's not going to work in tech again, at least not in any capacity where people check references or do basic due diligence. People ask me if I regret going public, if I wish I'd handled it more quietly. Honest answer? No. He tried to destroy my career with a lie. I defended myself with the truth. That's not revenge. That's just setting the record straight. And if the truth happened to destroy his company and his reputation in the process, well, maybe he should have thought about that before committing fraud and then trying to blame his employees for it. The truth is a powerful weapon, but sometimes justice is even simpler. Just one screenshot that changes everything. My ex-boyfriend spread rumors that I'd cheated on him and stolen money from his account. It started small, whispers to his close friends, carefully worded suggestions that maybe I wasn't who everyone thought I was. But it grew fast. Within weeks, the story had morphed into this elaborate narrative where I'd been carrying on an affair for months and had drained hundreds of dollars from his bank account to fund secret trips with my supposed side piece. His friends believed him immediately. Why wouldn't they? He was charismatic, well-liked, the kind of guy who could sell you anything with a smile and a convincing story. Mutual friends were forced to choose sides, and most of them chose his. I watched my social circle shrink in real time. People I'd known for years stopped inviting me to things, stopped responding to texts, gave me cold looks when we ran into each other at parties I hadn't been uninvited from yet. For 6 months, I defended myself. I showed bank statements proving I'd never touched his money. I offered to show text messages, call logs, anything that would prove I hadn't cheated. But no one listened. He'd gotten ahead of the narrative, positioned himself as the heartbroken victim, and I was just the desperate ex trying to salvage a reputation that was already destroyed. Every time I tried to explain what actually happened, that he was the one who'd cheated, that he'd emotionally manipulated me for over a year, people would give me these pitying looks like I was delusional. The truth was, he'd been cheating on me with multiple people throughout our relationship. I'd found out, confronted him, and broken up with him, and his response was to preemptively destroy my credibility so that when the truth eventually came out, no one would believe me. It was calculated, deliberate, and devastatingly effective. I started to give up, stopped trying to convince people, stopped defending myself, just accepted that this was my reality now. I'd lost friends, lost my standing in a community I'd been part of for years, all because one person decided to rewrite history and had the charisma to make people believe him. Then his new girlfriend found something. Her name was Jenna. We'd never met, but she reached out to me through Instagram with a message that just said, "I think you need to see this." Attached was a screenshot of a text conversation between my ex and one of his friends, dated from right after our breakup. And there, in his own words, was his entire strategy laid out. If I say she cheated first, no one will believe her when the truth comes out about me. I just need to control the narrative long enough for people to write her off completely. By the time anyone figures out what actually happened, her credibility will be shot. I stared at that screenshot for a solid 10 minutes, reading it over and over. He'd planned this. He'd deliberately and methodically destroyed my reputation as a preemptive strike to protect himself, and it had worked perfectly. But that wasn't even the worst part. Jenna sent me the entire conversation. It went on for pages. My ex admitting he'd been cheating on me for over a year, with at least 3 different people, laughing about how easy it was to gaslight me when I'd question him, detailing how he'd fabricated the theft story by showing his friends misleading screenshots of his bank account that made it look like I'd made withdrawals I'd never touched, planning out exactly what to say to mutual friends to turn them against me. And then, most damning of all, messages where he bragged about how well his plan was working, how I'd tried to tell people the truth and no one believed me, how he'd successfully isolated me from our entire friend group, how satisfying it was to watch me struggle to defend myself while he played the victim. Jenna said she'd found the conversation on his laptop while using it to check her email. She'd seen my name, gotten curious, and read the whole thing. She was horrified. She'd been dating him for 4 months at that point, and had completely believed his version of events. She'd even felt sorry for him, this poor guy who'd been so badly betrayed by his awful ex-girlfriend. Reading his actual words had shattered that illusion instantly. She sent me everything with an apology. She said she felt sick knowing she'd believed his lies, that she was leaving him, and that she thought I deserved to clear my name with the proof he'd stupidly left behind. I posted it everywhere: Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, sent it directly to the mutual friends who'd cut me off. I didn't editorialize, didn't add long explanations. I just posted the screenshots with a simple caption. 6 months ago, I tried to tell you the truth. Here it is in his own words. His reputation imploded overnight. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Friends who'd ghosted me started sending apologies, some of them crying in voice messages, saying they felt terrible for not believing me, for abandoning me, for choosing his side without giving me a fair chance. The friends who'd been closest to him, who'd been the most vocal about what a terrible person I was, were suddenly radio silent, probably too ashamed to reach out. My ex tried damage control. He posted a long statement claiming the screenshots were taken out of context, that he'd been venting to a friend and exaggerating, that he'd never actually done the things he described in detail. But the screenshots were too specific, too clear. There was no context that could explain away, I fabricated the theft story, or no one will believe her when the truth comes out about me. People started coming forward with their own stories. Other women he'd dated who'd experienced similar gaslighting. Friends who'd started to question his version of events, but had stayed quiet because he was so convincing. The pattern was undeniable. He wasn't just a liar, he was a serial manipulator who'd been doing this for years. And here's where it gets absurd. He tried to blame Jenna for the leak, posted accusations that she'd violated his privacy, and hacked his computer. Jenna responded with her own post explaining that she'd used his laptop with his permission and had stumbled onto the conversation by accident. She included screenshots of him giving her his password, telling her to use his laptop whenever she needed. His attempt to villainize her backfired spectacularly. Jenna left him publicly, posted about how she'd been manipulated too, how she felt used and disgusted, how she was grateful she'd found out who he really was before wasting more time. Her post got even more traction than mine because she'd been on his side originally, and her turning on him validated everything I'd been saying. My ex moved cities 3 months later, just packed up and left, couldn't handle the social fallout. Everyone knew what he'd done. His new job prospects dried up when potential employers Googled him and found the screenshots. His friend group had completely abandoned him. He'd lost everything he'd tried to protect by destroying me. I finally exhaled. For the first time in 6 months, I could breathe without feeling like I was drowning in lies and isolation. People believed me. The truth was out, and the friends who came back, who apologized and meant it, became closer than they'd ever been before because we'd been through something real together. Some friendships didn't survive. People who'd been too quick to believe him, too eager to cut me off, I couldn't fully trust again. And that's okay. You learn who people really are in moments like this. Jenna and I got coffee a few times. She felt guilty for having believed him, for having been part of the problem even unknowingly. I told her she'd ultimately been the one to fix it, that without her finding those messages, I'd probably still be living under the cloud of his lies. We're not best friends or anything, but there's a mutual respect there. She saw through the facade and had the integrity to do something about it. My ex tried to reach out once, months later, with some half-hearted apology about how he'd been in a bad place and made mistakes. I didn't respond. He didn't deserve my forgiveness or my closure. He deserved exactly what he got. And there you have it, 15 stories of betrayal, revenge, and the truth finally, brutally coming to light. If you've made it this far into the chaos, you're definitely my kind of person. These stories remind us that secrets always surface, liars eventually slip up, and sometimes the best revenge is simply letting the truth speak for itself. Sweet dreams, everyone, and remember, keep your receipts, trust your gut, and never underestimate the power of one well-timed screenshot. I'll see you in the next video with even more drama that will make you glad these aren't your problems. Until then, stay petty, stay honest, and for the love of all that's holy, clear your browser history. Good night.